Good morning and welcome to today's morning writing. I'm your live stream writing accountability partner, Rose Music, and we will be here from 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, working on whatever you need working on. I'm just going to pop into the live chat over here and get that primed so that you can share with me via the chat whatever it is you happen to be working on today. If you're not watching this live, feel free to use the comments area to let me know what you're using this video as sort of background white noise for. The white noise mostly being me tapping and whatever's going on outside my window. And I will check in with you at the end of our 2 hours together when we have completed our writing time and can check in and see what you got done today, what I got done today. There we go.
All right, the time is 10:59, which means now's a good time for us to begin wrapping up our live stream writing accountability practice for today. I'll just jump over here in the chat. All right, so let's begin our wrap up. This morning, I began working on 31 Days of Narratemes, the guided journal for questing the crap out of your daily self care. The link for that is in the info box below the video. And then, after I had done a little bit of work on that, I worked on something that will be a good tool to use with the guided journal. I began work on, or I continued work on a guided visualization um, inspired by The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen. I wrote an article about that story recently, and it's up on thegoldengooseeggs.com. The link to the site is below. It's 3 Strikes to Light a Fire is the name of the article. The guided visualization will be the 3 matches visualization. And so I spent most of my time working on that today, and mostly writing out a guided visualization is something I haven't done before. I've created many visualizations that I use for myself and for my own purposes, and now I'm trying to put it into words in much the same way that I would put an original fairy tale that I write into words. I usually just tell myself the story and get very used to the visuals again and again. And I muted the computer that way I'd be able to dictate the guided visualization to my computer. Um, that way it would have that very conversational, very shared experience feel to it. So I went through the visualization myself a couple of times today, and now I'm practicing just sort of saying it, being able to say it and go through it at the same time. And then once I have a feel for that, I will be dictating it to the computer. And I'll be kind of going back and forth between the practicing and the dictating that, or the dictation rather, and editing the dictation to try to find one that has the best feel to it. So when it's being read, it can evoke that sense of being in a guided visualization, but then also then I'll have a script written for a guided visualization, and I can record it and people can follow it, and they'll have the option of both based on what's comfortable for them. So that's what I spent most of the time working on today. And Shahan is now here. Hello. I saw the sample version, one on the link you shared. It's fine, comma. You ended with the comma there. So it sounds, that looks like you have more to say, but good luck. I saw the sample version. Is that the guided journal that you saw the sample version on in the link? Um, that is the guided journal in progress, what is publicly available, because the whole thing has been written. Now I'm in the process of editing the book. That's what I started the time out doing, is editing that a little before jumping to the guided visualization. And the uh, the Inkshares project that I link to, both in the chat and in the video, not in the video, in the info box below the video that I link to, the Inkshares project, is where I share the lessons after I have finished editing them as a way to promote the work while I'm working on it and hopefully get some pre-orders, which, even if you don't pre-order my book on Inkshares, I highly suggest going around Inkshares and finding books that you do enjoy and that you do want to pre-order. It's an important way to show writers that you value the work that they're doing. Um, yes, the publicly available copy. Yes. So the pre-orders are available, and I have the editing schedule all planned out so that as I go, by the time the campaign ends, which will be April 19th, by the time the campaign ends, um, the whole book will have been shared, but then you can get, with the pre-order, you would be able to get the ebook, an ebook, an ebook edition, or a print edition, depending on your preference, um, that you would be able to keep with you for always. Because once the campaign is over, the posts and the lessons that I shared publicly won't be available publicly anymore. Um, and also, if you follow the project without the pre-order, well, if you follow it as a pre-order or without, either way, the reader updates that I send every 4-ish days, depending on the pacing of certain lessons going out. The reader updates that I send out also include worksheets that go along with the lessons that are online. When the book is published as the physical copy, it will be a combination of the lessons and the worksheets. So it'll be a guided journal. Um, and the ebook will be more a collection of the lessons and directions on how to do things, plus a link to a PDF of the worksheets. Do I write any short stories? I do. I write wonder tales, which are fairy tales without the lame-isms, and they sometimes I rewrite fairy tales because even in their historical context, they don't make as much sense as they could. I try to bring the root stories of the root elements of the stories into and combine them with what we need to live in the world today, so that people can more readily make the connection between what goes on in a fairy tale and how it relates to living in the world. It's very difficult sometimes with a lot of the fairy tales that we already know to make those connections, because when they were printed is more telling of the historical context in which they were printed than it is about how those root elements relate to our lives today. So I rewrite fairy tales for that purpose, and I also write original fairy tales, um, which have the traditional fairy tale elements, such as depthlessness and intuitive logic, and the sublime, and everyday magic, and just all those little things that make a fairy tale a fairy tale. Any fiction work. My fiction work tends to be a little longer. If you go to my Inkshares profile by clicking through the Inkshares project link, you'll find on the, because you see me in a mirror image, right? All right, so this is my left, your right. So on your right side of the screen, there is a list of the projects that I have on Inkshares. My priority project being 31 Days of Narratemes. The fiction that I have over there, I have the paranormal story and Sally Forth. I have a collection of I have a growing collection of Wonder Tales over there. A small collection, and so far one story collection called Weird Tales, which are both sort of fantastical and science fiction. The only science fiction project I have publicly available at the moment, actually, I technically have two science fiction projects. The first is the penrosetrekkie.com, which you can find a link for that when you go into the info box below, better-storytelling. It'll list that is my online CV with current projects, and the Penrose Trekkie is where I blog my way through every series of Star Trek and write Pushkin sonnets for particularly thematically inspiring episodes, but I also make notations next to certain episodes. I make notations next to certain episodes about which ones have ideas that I want to expand on in my own science fiction. And then the second science fiction project I have online is one I'm co-writing, or I was co-writing. It's on pause right now. I'm co-writing it with my sister, so it's on her Inkshares profile. Her name is Emily Jermusic. So you can search for her profile on Inkshares. You could also search The Janitors on Inkshares, because that's the name of the project that is on her profile. And the first chapter of that work is up. And it's a sort of mix of The Three Musketeers and Firefly. Um, and I'm slowly working on her so that we can get back to working on that book, because it's really good. How long you started to write? Um, I started writing. Well, I started writing publicly. The easiest way to put this is I started writing publicly when I was 13, when I first when we first left when my family first left Ohio and moved to Delaware. I was introduced to a website called fanfiction.net by my cousin, and I wrote a novella, actually, because of how long it ended up being. I wrote a novella that was a retelling of Snow White, and it is rough. It is really rough. And also something really funky happened when I was trying to update the book a while back. Um, so now, instead of it having multiple chapters, it's all one chapter, but it's the whole story as one paragraph. And I can't log in anymore. I can't log in and edit it so that it's easy to read, which is fine, because it's, I, because even if the formatting were nice, it's a really weird story. Um, I was trying to jam so many different ideas in, and I didn't know yet how to. I didn't understand my world building skills as yet. Um, I've over I've always overanalyzed things. I never well, I was always described as an overanalyzer. I didn't realize that what I was actually doing was world building, was trying to figure out how all the pieces fit together. And so 13 years old is when I first started writing publicly, and I was working on that project, and there were so many things in there. And looking at it now, I remember how I thought all the pieces fit together and how I was struggling to connect those dots. And so part of me wants to take what I was working on and try to do it again, try to do a retelling of Snow White again. But I actually am already working on a rewrite of Snow White, which is the paranormal story that I'm working on. Sally Forth is actually a very loose retelling of Snow White. I'm I'm just really excited that I'm going to be working on that book again soon. Yes. So that's how long I've been writing, was 13. Starting writing things, it's usually as soon as I get the idea, I start writing. Um, I start writing with an idea. I'll write the idea down. I'll write the whatever first sentences come along. Um, and I have difficulty letting go of anything that I've written down. So then I have so many different projects that'll just come out of one idea. You heard once that most writers are sadists or socially inactive people. Some writers, um, sadist is very harsh, socially inactive. Um, I seem different actually because of my OCD. I am an introvert. I do prefer to keep to myself. Being a writer, having to sit with your own words for a really long time, uh, does, you know, it is common to find that writers are in some way introverted. Um, but then it also depends on the genre of writing because certain genres will attract certain personalities, like being a journalist, being a nonfiction writer, and having to talk to people in order to get their stories and then turn them into work tends to draw a lot of extroverted writers, such as Elizabeth Gilbert, who, while she does have those introverted moments where she just wants to write the things she wants to write that's fiction or memoir, she also, goes out, interviews people to write short stories, interviews people to write all sorts of things over the course of her career. Um, she is much more of a go-getter. And that also shows in the jobs that she's held while supporting her writing that she talks about, working as a waitress and working as a bartender in particular. Um, so being an introvert or being an extrovert is more likely to tell you what kind of a genre someone's going to, or what major category of writing somebody's going to be drawn to. My OCD subtype is sinner doubter, which means my OCD as an anxiety based condition is anchored to social anxiety. So I've always put much more effort into really continuously trying to prove myself as being entertaining or proving myself as being intelligent, proving myself as being um, worthy of whatever space I happen to be taking up. And also that fear of people having negative perception of me, making me much more proactive in trying to manage how people perceive me and interacting with them. So I've learned to be very communicative, and because of the big personalities of the family that I'm in, I've also learned how to be, by habit, very confident in presenting what it is I'm saying, even though, like, I'm just in my head freaking out, wanting to cower and hide or whatever. But I've just built up this muscle over time because of the dynamics of my family and the nature of my OCD that have caused me to really push myself and be in front of people. Um, I also, before deciding to be a writer, was planning on being an actor. And um, introverted that I am, once I feel comfortable around people, I am a total goofball and just bouncing off the walls and just wanting to entertain people and make people happy. So for a really long time, I thought that meant I wanted to be an actor. And I went to college to study theater, and I realized really quickly that my particular introversion and my particular lifelong struggle of continuously trying to prove myself does not mesh well with a life where you're living from one audition to the next. You're constantly standing in front of people to perform, yes, but you're constantly standing there as a piece of meat. Um, an actor, yes, someone who performs in movies and on stage. I do perform as a storyteller from time to time. I feel very comfortable doing that in my local community here at AS220. Um, I'll type that in. as220.org. It is a nonprofit organization created by artists for artists to um, create as many opportunities as possible for people to be exposed to creative work that they might not otherwise see because of the gatekeepers in the various um, artistic fields or artistic industries. And then also people who were coming up against those gatekeepers can now instead just present their work. And I am one of many artists who reside at AS220, so that we're downtown where the majority of the arts opportunities are. And so I live downtown in Providence at AS220, and there are annual resident shows where we present our work to each other. A resident gallery where everybody who is a visual artist presents their work. And so I need to actually email somebody and let them know, yes, I'll be performing in the resident show because I'm a resident. And also choose what I will be performing in that show. Womp womp. Working in drama, no, but I have been in plays. I went to an arts high school and I was the nurse in Romeo and Juliet there, and I was Mrs. Potts in Beauty and the Beast there. Lost connection. Everything looks fine on my end. Are you still there? Um, I think that because I think the lost connection is on your end. So I haven't. Okay. So I have. So I performed in high school, and basically as soon as I left Ohio and moved to Delaware, I started doing theater, did some community theater, was the Roseheller in Oliver, um, and did some plays in college when I switched majors. Um, and I switched majors and became, well, first I was an English major because I thought I would end up in an MFA program and be teaching at the college level. Um, and when in college, I did 6 characters in search of an author, and I was one of the 6 characters. I was the stepdaughter, which is pretty much the female lead. Um, and I called my mother and I was whispering into my phone to let her know that I had gotten that part. And she said, "Are the theater majors mad at you? And are they okay with a non-theater major getting like the lead role?" And I turned to my friend Gina, who was the only theater major I knew at the school that I had switched to, and I asked her if she was okay with and the other theater majors were okay with me getting the lead, and she said, "Yes, there's like only 5 of us and we're all techies, so we're cool." um, and then after that, I was in the musical Urinetown as Penelope Pennywise, and I had the big solo, "The Privilege to Pee," or "A Privilege to Pee." That's a crazy show. And then I moved here, and actually, a friend of mine pulled me into a play that she was in, and one of the actors dropped. Um, and so I was the writer, not the writer. I played the part of the editor and a professor in Cradle Will Rock. Oh, and another community performance piece I did. I just have to say this. Before, when I first left the theater program at Towson University, and was taking a year off from school, my high school theater teacher, Denver Garrison, who was no longer working at the high school, was putting on a community performance of I Never Saw Another Butterfly, which is a musical based on the Terezin, what happened at the Terezin war ghetto, particularly with regards to Irena Sinkova teaching the children there. It was the model ghetto in Poland, that whenever the Nazis wanted to show the world that they were treating Jews right, they would show them film footage of the Terezin ghetto. And Irena Sinkova was there, and she was a teacher, so she was teaching the kids there to the best of her ability. They weren't given any actual educational resources. She would go around the ghetto just looking for scraps of paper, even if it was a sheet of paper from, people being sent off to one of the camps, and it was like the list of numbers that had been called. She would take those sheets of paper and she would bring them to school, and she would find scraps of crayons and scraps of pens and pencils. And the children would write stories and poetry and draw pictures. And so that experience and making that into that little school setup that was going on in Terezin, and the poetry that those children wrote became the basis of this musical. Were after the war, because she buried them. She hid everything the children made so that they would survive. And then after the war, they were unburied, uncovered, and printed in a book called I Never Saw Another Butterfly, which is a line from one of the poems that the children wrote, because once they were in the ghetto, they never saw butterflies there. And so it was made into a book, and somebody made it someone in Australia wrote a musical about it, taking lines from the various poetry. And then we put it on at the Jewish Community Center in Delaware. And I actually played the part of Irena Sinkova in that. And actually, I didn't audition for that. The woman who was supposed to play that part dropped about 2 weeks before the show was supposed to go on, before they were supposed to perform for anybody. She just dropped. I was like, "You're the lead." And my teacher called me to ask me to come and fill that spot. And in 3 days, I'd learned all my songs, all my solos. And by the end of the week, I had learned all my lines. And then the following week was tech week, when we're dressing in costumes and going through just run-throughs of the play over and over and over again before the performance dates happened. So, but it was a really great experience and a really beautiful experience. And yeah, it's such, yeah, yeah, I just, that's probably my favorite show that I was in, if I'm honest. Really, really honest. Well, I know how to perform, and that's what you're saying, is that I do have that performative quality still, and I'm still very good at presenting myself. Like I said, I've built up the muscle for it. And once you build up the muscle for it, you can just kind of drop back into it, like riding a bicycle. Like when my friend was doing a musical last year, well, a year ago, um, somebody in the show dropped, and it was an ensemble cast, so you could just sort of rearrange the actors you had to compensate for somebody being missing. And the way they were looking at reconfiguring it, she would have had to relinquish her favorite solo that she had been practicing out of what her parts entailed. So she asked me if I would come to rehearsal one day and see whether or not I wanted to join so that I could take over the person who had left's part or parts, and she could keep the solo she wanted to keep, which worked out really well because I ended up having a pretty fun solo myself. Have you been to Honolulu, where your boredom would be banned? Bid your family toodaloo-doo, sail away to that fair land. That's just the out for you, and you'll have your work too. A little scribbling on your father's journal. Nothing ever happens over there. Um, yeah, so that was fun. And she played the ukulele for that song. So that made that a lot of fun too. um, but yeah, I still, as I mentioned before, I write original fairy tales and I'm a storyteller. So I'll go and I'll perform the stories that I've written. And some of the stories, as I'm writing on them, take on a more lyrical or musical quality or have singing involved. So there is singing sometimes in the storytelling performances that I do. And it is important as part of my lease here at AS220 that I continue to create new work and create and continue to perform. Um, so I have no trouble doing that because I got plenty to share. And it is now 11:30. So that means we have I have been rambling along here and it is time for us to conclude our time together today. I will see you. I will be here with you again tomorrow from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I look forward to working alongside with you via live stream some more. Good journey, my friends.